Hello, everyone. So firstly, thanks for having me, and thanks for the previous speakers. As I said, it's very interesting. Uh, my name is Craig Turley, and I'm the Fisheries Director at the International Pole and Line Foundation. I've been lucky enough to go out on commercial fishing vessels all around the world, in South Africa, Indonesia, Maldives, Oman, Kenya, Tanzania, and so have been able to see different tuna fishing practices around the world. And today, my presentation is on what we consider to be the current best practice handling for tunas and the lessons learned from around the world. I'm going to talk about a couple of things. So I'm going to talk about the handling of large, high-value tunas and what we know about that so far. All from anecdotal fishery, like real-world fisheries experience. And I'll also touch on pole and line fishing and the considerations for improving catch welfare. So firstly, who are IPNLF, or the International Pole and Line Foundation? We work to develop, support, and promote socially and environmentally responsible one-by-one tuna fisheries worldwide. By one-by-one tuna fisheries, we mean pole and line, hand line, rod and reel, and troll fisheries, which are all fisheries that use one hook and one line to catch one fish at a time. We work across the fishery. So we work on the water, particularly in three areas, which is quality and cold chain improvements, smart fishing, which is all about operational efficiency of these fishing vessels, and climate change solutions. So looking at things like improving the fuel efficiency of vessels and bringing solar technology into the value chain. We also work in the market, and we have market members from processing all the way through the supply chain to big international retailers and brands. And so we advise the producers, we help guide the market, and we help unlock finance, which can flow into small-scale fisheries. And finally, we work in the ocean-wide policy space, both at the national, regional, and global policy space. Our mission is to empower responsible fisheries which give back to the seas and people that depend on them. And our vision is a world with thriving fisheries that work in balance with nature by catching one fish at a time. So I'm going to talk a bit about IPNF's quality and cold chain training. So this is something that we've developed over the years, basically by working with different fisheries around the world and collecting little tips and tricks that help the fishery to maintain quality. And quality is really the key when it comes to the prosperity of these small-scale fisheries. Just a little note on my history. I've worked for IPNF for over 5 years, mostly as a consultant before moving into this fisheries director role. And I also previously worked in a commercial rod and reel yellowfin fishery, where I managed every part of the process from capture on the vessel all the way through the processing, logistics to export abroad. And that was fresh yellowfin tuna. In the past 5 years with IPNF, we have done practical training workshops in Indonesia, Oman, Kenya, Tanzania. And these practical training workshops, we do them both on land, so in the processing facility with all the processing staff, teaching things like how to properly process a tuna, how to properly grade tuna. But we also teach training on board the vessels and go to sea with the fishermen and do practical training. So just wanted to point out something on this slide. If you see that picture in the top right, on the left, you have tuna that was caught without best practice handling. And as you can see, the meat is slumped, it's brown, it's burnt, the bloodlines are almost black. And I think you could easily say this is grade C or even below. But on the right, you'll see a tuna loin that's been caught using best practice technology, best practice handling. And both of these fish were caught on the same boat on the same day. And as you can see, the difference is undeniable. And so the evidence for these best practice handling are very clear. And there's a nice quote from one of the fishing companies we work with there that says, you know, when we teach fishermen how to produce higher grade fish, they can triple their earnings. And their product can then be sold to international markets rather than just to a domestic market, which means rural fishers can increase their access and improve their livelihoods. So through this process of training fishermen, we developed a 7-step best practice fish handling and cold chain guide for handline and rod and reel fisheries. And this guide was primarily developed with quality in mind. And so fish welfare wasn't the primary goal behind this, but as the two previous presenters alluded to, fish welfare is in line with high quality, because high quality is about dispatching the fish as quickly and efficiently as possible and ensuring you can get it into ice slurry as quickly as possible in order to keep the quality. The 7-step best practice has obviously 7 steps, but the first 3 are gaffing the tuna, bleeding the fish, and the ikejime technique. And I'm glad someone in the questions raised the ikejime technique because I'm going to talk about it a bit more. Those are the 3 steps that really focus on fish welfare, because after the ikejime technique, the fish has lost consciousness completely. Its nervous system has been scrambled. And actually, just quickly, I'm going to jump over to this video. For those of you who haven't seen the ikejime technique before, this is a quick video of it from our training video that we actually developed for fishers. It is gruesome, I do warn you, but it's important to see what the practice looks like in reality. So as you can see, a wire is being placed down the entire spinal column of the fish. And once that's done, the fish has completely lost consciousness and no longer maintains any movement in its muscles. And the reason we do that step is because if you miss out that step and you just spike the fish, for example, then the muscles in the fish can continue to twitch and continue to move even up to 20 minutes after death. And that continues that lactic acid process, that continues the burning of the meat. So by piffing the fish and putting that wire all the way down the spinal column, you essentially stop all metabolic processes in the muscles of the fish. And this has been shown, as on the previous slide, to have very clear benefits. This whole process, step 1 to 3, usually takes about 20 to 30 seconds once the fish gets to the surface. And then the following steps, the bringing the fish on board, placing that's not meant to say supply chain context, that's meant to say gutting and gilling the fish, placing in a protective mutton cloth, and then placing the fish in the tuna slurry. All of that is done to ensure that you maintain the quality and that you get the fish into cooling as quickly as possible. I wanted to talk about a few considerations when we talk about improving fish welfare. For me, number 1 is fisher safety. These tuna are very large tunas. They're very powerful. And so ensuring the safety of fishermen when they're handling these tuna is of utmost importance. Secondly, fish quality is, for the fishers, the most important thing. Maintaining the quality ensures that you get a good value for the product and that it was therefore worth harvesting from the ocean in the first place. We often talk a lot about how it's not about catching lots of fish, it's about catching few fish and handling them properly and honoring each fish that we capture. I've noted here this high fish value and why this is important. this is also important because when it comes to securing the fish next to the boat, fishermen often use a gaff, which is, a big hook that they place through the head of the fish. The reason it's so important to secure that fish, not only for the safety, but also because if fishermen lose that fish, particularly in the developing world context like Indonesia, losing a fish can be devastating. It can mean the difference between having an income that day and not having an income that day. So it's of utmost importance that any improvements in the future don't risk that securing of these high value fish. Another consideration is the diversity of fishing fleets and the practical and financial restrictions that has. I have another slide later when I'll talk about that a bit more. And finally, the market implications. Something I wanted to note here is that many people look at this idea of a premium or a premium as the main incentive for taking over a new practice. But in reality, premiums are elusive. They're the golden goose egg. And very rarely these days do we see any premium resulting from better handled or better marketed fish. So in my opinion, the real win for fishers here and the real incentive for uptake needs to be operational efficiency and quality. When fishers can gain an advantage because they have a more efficient operation with reduced costs, then this helps them to survive when competing against industrial fisheries, for example. I want to show you a quick video just to highlight a point on fisher safety. So I'm just jumping over to Facebook quickly. This is a woman in the US single-handedly landing 1,000-pound bluefin tuna. As you can see, there's high swells, the fish is moving around a lot. It's extremely heavy, and needless to say, it's a very dangerous operation. So safety is of utmost importance. And imagine when securing that fish next to the boat, you need to be sure that your method of securing that fish is very secure. Back to my presentation. Again, moving on to securing the fish. Generally, the best or the most commonly used method we see around the world is a gaff, which is a pole with a large hook on the end. And we recommend in our best practice to secure the fish with 2 gaffs. The reason for this is because when you do the ikajimi process, you do it in the water. It's not safe to bring a large live tuna onto the vessel, especially on some of the smaller vessels, as we'll see in a minute. There's just simply no space to bring it on board. It becomes dangerous. It becomes a risk to the fishers. As I mentioned earlier, securing the fish is also about the livelihoods of fishermen, and losing a fish could be devastating in some contexts. And finally, there's some methods around the world use a sling to secure the bluefin tuna or yellowfin tuna. And I think slings are great when they can be used, but in some contexts, the vessels just don't lend themselves to using a sling. So as I'm going to show in this slide, these are all handline or rod and reel vessels from different parts of the world. As you can see in the Maldives, you've got a very large vessel, lots of deck space, the ability to have an overhead crane on board if you needed, and it lends itself to a lot of different types of handling methods. Below that, here you'll see what's a mothership. And if you see at the back, these tiny little vessels, they're what they actually conduct the fishing on. And as you can imagine, those vessels are very small, they're very unstable. And so really there's no room to add extra equipment or any extra burden to that fishery. Really, it's about keeping it as simple and safe as possible. And then you've got fisheries like these two. So this one here is South Africa, and the one below it is the US. And these vessels generally have a higher ability to invest in a solution, but they're limited by their deck space. And And I should say, for one-by-one fisheries worldwide, investment capital is always going to be a challenge. Finally, I wanted to talk about the challenges of improving fish welfare on pole and line fisheries. So pole and line fisheries is generally targeting skipjack tuna for canning. It's a very quick, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Chaotic fishing method where there's tuna being slung overhead by a pole. And as you see on this Indonesian vessel, they flick the tuna over, it lands on this landing deck and then slides down into a holding area. The challenges with this fishery is that in order to improve welfare, you would need to individually handle each fish. But because of the high volume of fish that come in a very short time, several tons of fish can be landed in less than 15-minute period, then it becomes very difficult to individually handle each fish. Quality is also less of a priority in the pole and line fishery. Skipjack are generally destined for canning, so canning grade tuna doesn't have the same importance. With the exception of a few fisheries around the world, there's a few examples of sashimi grade skipjack fisheries in Japan, for example, but that's a very niche product. And finally, vessel infrastructure. I mean, in a lot of cases, what we see here is an Indonesian vessel. Adding things like electricity or cranes or anything like that will be a challenge for this vessel. And so, in my opinion, improving fish welfare in pole and line fisheries is primarily an engineering challenge. Now, I'm going to show you an example here, and again, I'm going to jump out to another link. But what we have here is the Japanese pole and line fishery, and in my opinion, it's what I would say is the best practice example of a fishery in the world. So, as you see, the Japanese are flinging them backwards. They're hitting a sloped deck, and then they're sliding down that deck onto a conveyor belt, which takes them directly into a slurry. This method, I believe, lends itself much better to fish welfare, as you could potentially individually treat each fish as it slides along this conveyor belt. And I think that many of the vessels around the world, including Indonesia, Maldives, could be modified to have a similar way of fishing. Going back to the presentation. And that's it. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, happy to answer now or at the end.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg. I think that gave us, for a lot of people, it's a very good insight of the reality of tuna fisheries. We have questions. One from Christine Su from Aquatic Life Institute. Do you plan on incorporating more best practices with animal welfare perspective going forward, such as ways to immobilize the fish in water so you don't need to gaff them?
Yes, we do intend on looking into those things, and as part of our 2025 to 2030 strategy, fish welfare is an explicit part of that strategy. We're engaging with the Catch Welfare Platform, of course. We're also engaging with Fairfish and any other initiatives where we can be involved. And from our side, a large part of it is that ensuring that any techniques or suggestions that are made are practical for the fisheries we work with. We work with small-scale fishermen who are often already constrained with market access, already competing against industrial fisheries. So we want to ensure that engaging in fish welfare really provides them an advantage.
Yep. So I got similar questions both on my email and here on the chat, but maybe it's better to address this separate because I think it does deserve a little bit of time to discuss in the panel discussion. And we will now have a break. Yeah, very brief because.
Just a brief comment from my side. I fully agree with you, Craig, that it has to be safe for the crew on board. No doubt about that. But I think there are many ways to work on the issues and improve welfare, because we have seen it, for instance, in slaughterhouses with eel. We managed to develop methods suitable for large scale, but also for 20 kilos. And a company that's processing 20 kilos a day, no way they can afford a very expensive stunner. This is just an example about the flexibility you have to keep in mind. It's about costs, it's about working conditions, but I don't have a clear answer, to be honest. But we are really aware of these issues, that it has to be safe for the workers and it really needs to be an improvement overall.
But there is ways.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, let's get back to this in the panel discussion.